In this video, I am going to discuss switch statements, which are in our chapter on decision structures. They're an alternative to if statements, and I'd like to talk a little bit about how they're different from if statements and the situations you'd use them in. So, as you saw with if statements give us a choice between two alternatives. They're always going to be a choice between two alternatives because you either can evaluate the conditional that's in the if statement to true, or you can evaluate it to false. So you only ever have two possible outcomes for a conditional expression. It's going to be true or it's going to be false. To handle more complicated situations and outcomes, we do things like we nest if statements. We put them within each other. And we have series of if statements, so we can chain them together. But and these work great for many situations. But sometimes, or in fact often, we come up against a situation where we don't have a choice between two things, but we have a choice among a number of things that are single values, or something like single values. For instance, categories of things. So you're going to do something if you've got category A, you do one thing. Category B, you do another thing. Category C, you do another thing. And as long as we can identify those separate categories as specific, as identifiable by a single value, then we can use a switch statement to tell our program to do something different depending on the category that we're dealing with. So I'm going to use the example pet food for this video. So if you get your book open to the chapter on decision structures, pet food is on page 243 of my book. It should be of your book as well. It's code listing 417, in case that helps you find it, section 410. So pet food is a program that allows the user to input a grade of food, and based on the grade of food that is chosen, the program is going to tell the user what the pricing is for that grade of pet food. And this illustrates a couple of interesting things about the way that switch statements work with their different cases. And so I thought it was a great example for us to go over in this video. First of all, you should be familiar with some of the stuff that's going on here. We have variable declarations. We also have some comments that explain what these variables are for. I'll let you look at those and interpret those. We have our scanner for input, and now we have some prompts for the user that explain to the user what this program is doing and what is expected of the user for user input. Then we read from the keyboard, and then we interpret that keyboard input, and then we have our switch statement, so we get our output. So we'll run it in a moment. One thing I want to highlight is in the interpretation of input, this is important. Here are our prompts. We're asking the user to type in a character. But this input line, this line of this statement here, reads a line of input from the keyboard, an entire line of input. So what is a line of input? What does it look like? A line of input is actually going to be a string. It's the string that is whatever string of characters, whatever series of characters you type in to the console before you hit enter. That entire series of characters is going to be a line of input, and it's going to be put in this variable called input, which is a string. Okay, so if we're going to interpret whether the user typed A, B, or C, then we have to look at the first character in that line of input. And that's why that's why you have this pair of statements here. One is reading an entire line of input from the keyboard, and the second statement here is actually calling a method of the string object that gets the character at position 0. If you recall, when we spoke about computer scientists and programmers, they always start counting at position 0 for various reasons. And in this case, so when we want the first character from the string known as input, we ask for the character at position 0. And this is the way we do that. So that's an example of one way we can look at the contents of a string and use it to our advantage. Okay, so before we take a look at the switch statement, I'm going to quickly run the program and see what it does, and you can tell me if it does what you expect it to do. I'll hit the run button, and we get our pet food is available in 3 grades, A, B, or C. Which do you want pricing for? And I urge you, as programmers, whenever you see something like this, to take the mindset of a person who is testing software. Do it with your own software. Do it with other people's software. It will make you a better programmer. And I think in the first week, at some point, I mentioned the compiler as kind of being like a mischievous child in some ways. It will, or a genie. It will mess up in the interpretation of a program wherever it can. That's not really exactly true. Mischievous child is actually a good description, I think. Well, as a software programmer, as a tester, I think you should also embrace that kind of mischievousness, because if you always do what is expected of your program, you'll never test it for those times when something unexpected happens. So if you think about mischief in interacting with these programs, then you will also be testing the programs for what can possibly go wrong. And when I tell you that, that's kind of a preamble to me being ready to do something mischievous to this program, which is that even though it's asking for A, B, and C, I'm going to do something and give it something that is different. So I'm just going to basically mash the keyboard a little bit, and here's some test input for this program. And now I'm going to hit enter and see what happens. So this program did not crash. And so it just told me I have an invalid choice. And it completed running. So even though it ended, it didn't crash. It didn't give me an error, which is good. That's the sign of a program that is robust. So it was able to survive some input that was not what it was asking for. Okay, excellent. Later on, we'll learn about error checking, so that we can actually respond in an even more appropriate fashion, in an even more useful fashion. But at least it's great to see that this program ends without crashing. All right, well, what if we do give it a value that it expects? So let's give it A, and it tells us 30 cents per pound is the price for that food. So let's see how it accomplishes that. Let's see actually how it accomplished the correct input case and the unexpected input case. So here's the switch statement. It's got a nice comment telling us what the purpose of the switch statement is. It's switching on the value of feed grade. So let's see, what feed grade is the single character that we got from the beginning of the user's line of input. So in this case, if we look down at what I typed in this case, that single character was A. That was the only character that I typed in that line before I hit enter. So if we go into the switch statement, we see our cases. And in fact, the switch statement is already doing something that's kind of different than you might expect if you've only seen a switch statement maybe one time. It's doubling up on the cases. So this is a feature of the switch statement, is that the cases can be combined so that one outcome is used for more than one case. So just to show you what this might look like, if you have two cases that are handled exactly the same way, and that would look kind of like this. There's an extra space in there. Okay, that would look kind of like this. So for case lowercase a, we're going to handle it by saying it's that, grade A is 30 cents per pound. But if the user typed in uppercase A, I'm sorry, I didn't do this correctly. That we for lowercase a and uppercase a, they're still both grade A. So we want to handle them both the same way because we consider it to be in the meaning to be the same. So we combine them, just like with case B, by putting one case after the other. And why does that work? Well, it works because once the case is identified, it just continues to process. It ignores, well, I should say that it continues to process the switch statement until it encounters a break. Let's describe it that way, because then I can show you exactly how that works. So when we switch on feed grade, it gets to the beginning of this case statement. If the case is uppercase A, then it does this. If not, it keeps looking until it finds the case for uppercase A. So it doesn't execute the case until it finds a matching case. So here it found a matching. Let's see. Let's run this again now that I've changed the code. Okay, I type A, type A, and it does the same thing it did before. Okay, so in this case it skips over case A, case lowercase a here. It finds case uppercase A. It outputs 30 cents per pound, and then it hits this break. Break tells it to break all the way out of the switch statement. In other words, to continue processing after the end of the switch statement. So just to show that it's popped out of the switch statement, I'm going to do what programmers who like to debug code do all the time. I'm going to put in additional messages that tell me when it's got to a certain place in our code. I'm out of the switch statement. I and other programmers all over the place use print statements as a way of understanding what is going on in our code. So this is kind of a vital tool for you to see how the processing of your code is working. Later on, we're going to look at how to use the debugger a little bit, which is another really important tool for debugging programs. But you may be in programming environments that don't have a debugger, in which case, and in fact, you may, for some purposes, you may not want to use a debugger, and if you don't have a tool like a debugger, the best way to get information out of your program is to put print statements wherever you want to know something about the program. So in this case, like you can, for instance, get the value of any variable at any time in the program by printing out the value of a variable. So, like, for instance, let's copy this. Let's have another print statement up here just to output, just to feed back the user typed a character. So we're going to tell the user what the user typed. Okay. I'm going to run this again to show how that works. So we save the program. So it's asking us for input. I type capital A. It notifies me. The user typed a, it's not proper English, but user typed it a character, gives the price, and then notifies us that it's out of the switch statement. So this is just helping us see how the program is executing, and if we had a problem with this program, it might give us some information that would help us solve the problem. Right now we don't have a problem with the program, but what it does do is it helps us understand how this program is functioning. And by that I mean we have plenty of print statements in here that aren't being reached. So we know that when this program ran, it only hit the print statements that are doing what you see here. So for instance, it hit the prompts, it hit the user typed A character, it hit one of these 30 cents per pound. We can guess which one that is by the case statement. But then it didn't hit any other of these print statements because it hit this break statement. Okay? The break breaks it out of the switch block and tells it to continue on after. That's very important. So how important are the breaks? Well, let's take them out and see how this program functions without any breaks. Well, actually, instead of doing that, I'm going to use the tried and true method of commenting out statements, which means these statements no longer exist in the program. According to the compiler, they are completely ignored. So what happens if we don't use break statements in a switch statement? You will encounter this case if ever you forget to put your breaks in, which I do all the time when I'm using switch statements. I always remember afterwards. I shouldn't say I always do it. I have frequently forgotten to put break statements in there. Okay, so what happens when you do that? So we're going to choose A again. And now we get a much different output. In this case, we get the response that a user typed in A character, but now look what it's doing. It's just a mess. It's giving us the case for A, but without the break to tell it to exit the switch statement, it's giving us the case for B as well and for C. Useless. Okay? And in fact, it also gave us the default case. We didn't talk about that. But so it's giving us the output for every case. So it's clear that the break is vital to how this case statement works. Okay? I'm going to remove these and restore this to the original switch statement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the default case now. I'll run it again to get the output that we expect a little bit, the working output, A. So when we choose one of the available options, A, B, or C, or in fact, to run it again, lowercase a, B, or C, oops, we get one of the cases that it's handled in the switch statement, that's handled explicitly in the switch statement. Okay. But what happens in the case that we give it something it doesn't expect, like D? D isn't one of the choices here. And that's what the default line is. The default line prefaces the code in your switch statement that is going to handle what happens when the user does something unexpected and that the value of feed grade is not one of the ones that's specified in your cases. So it's an unhandled case. The unhandled case goes to the default. If you don't have a default in your switch statement, let's see what happens in that. If I have that, it will just do nothing if it can't handle the case. So let's try that. So I type garbage here. It tells me the user typed a D character because D is the first character of this line of input. And then it just says it's out of the switch statement, which is not a really great way to handle the user input in this program because the user will never know why it is that they didn't get a response to the input. So the break is very important in the switch statement. The default case is important to give some kind of feedback to the user about what happened with their input. And we've also seen that cases can have individual handlers in code that applies to just one case, or you can have code that applies to multiple cases. Perhaps we decide that we would like to handle case D because we now have added food, a pet food grade D, but maybe D is the same cost as C. And if that is true, then we could have something like this. We can handle D, but there's no reason to have additional code in this case because it's the same cost as C. Well, actually, let's just make it, instead of doing this, let's make it the same cost as B. I don't know why, I just feel like not putting it near the end. Okay, so the order, this is to show you that the order is not important at all. Order of the cases is completely not important except when you leave out the breaks. So, in fact, the order here, I can put this D up here and get rid of this line. It doesn't matter because if it's a D or a B, it's going to go to this case here. If I run it, you'll see that that is what happens. What case do we want pricing for? Oh, I didn't change the, you'll note I didn't change the prompt, but sorry about that sloppiness. I'm going to choose grade D, and I get 20 cents per pound, and it works. Okay? Now, that covers the most important things about switch statements. I hope that answers any questions. I hope that's enough of variation in options to show you a little bit of the power and the flexibility that you have with, a switch statement with case. Sometimes I call it a case statement. I don't know why. It's a switch statement, of course. If there's anything about this that you do not understand, that you would like me to go into more detail about, please ask in class. You can also email me. You can actually email me that you'd like me to talk about something specific more in class, or you can come to office hours where I will answer any questions you have. If you do have questions, the more specific they are, the better I will be able to address them. So I hope that's helpful, and think about any questions you might have.